Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to part one of our pest education seminar series on termite biology and control. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping rules. Please, everyone, mute your line. I've muted everyone, but if you become unmuted for some reason, please mute your line again. Use the chat box to ask any questions, and we'll answer all the questions at the end of the webinar. This webinar is not offering CEUs at this time. For any additional questions not answered in the webinar, you can email them to education@nola.gov. And this webinar will be posted on our website, www.nola.gov/mosquito, and also on our YouTube channel. Today's topic is termite biology and identification. Termite control in your home begins with the understanding of basic termite biology, identification, and behavior. Today's speakers are Dr. Carrie Cantone and Dr. Mark Janowicki. Mark Janowicki, a native of Ohio, completed his undergraduate degree in entomology at the Ohio State University. As an undergrad, he had the chance to work with Dr. Susan Jones, who first instilled in him a love of termites. Next, Mark joined Dr. Alan Solansky's lab at the University of Arkansas to complete his master's degree in entomology. In Arkansas, Mark continued studying termites and began to learn molecular tools to differentiate populations and species. Mark went on to complete his PhD with Dr. Ed Vargo at Texas A&M University. His project investigated physiological and behavioral factors that influence native subterranean termite colony spatial dynamics. Dr. Carrie Cantone has been employed by the City of New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board for the past 15 years. She received her PhD in entomology in 2011 as a distance education student at the University of Florida. Her research focused on survival mechanisms of Formosan subterranean termite colonies during times of prolonged flooding. Her current job duties include managing our termite control division and working with collaborators to test new products and formulations for termite treatments.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Anastasia, and thank you everybody for joining us today. When it comes to kind of an overview of termite biology, behavior, and identification, I always like to start with the good things about termites before we get into the bad and the ugly, right? So many people don't realize how beneficial termites are to our ecosystem. So they are wood recyclers. They are very unique in that because not many organisms can actually break down cellulose. So they're able to feed on wood, break down that cellulose, and release those nutrients back into our ecosystem. Thing that termites can do for our ecosystem is provide a food source for other animals. These can be amphibians, reptiles, even birds, and surprisingly mammals as well. They provide a really great source of protein that's needed by several animals. However, they are considered pests when they begin to damage things that we value. So like I said, they feed on anything containing cellulose, but they do rely on gut bacteria and protozoa to digest wood, and they have this symbiotic relationship with their gut fauna. And even though they can be very damaging to wood products, anything containing cellulose, just keep in mind that fewer than 10% of termite species around the world are considered pests. So termite colonies have a caste system. Many of us are familiar with social insects just having different castes within their colonies. In a termite colony, you will find workers, soldiers, and reproductives, which are also called alates. So workers are the ones that we're familiar with actually doing damage to wood. So they will be feeding on wood, providing food for the rest of the colony. They are the ones that are out foraging for food sources as well, and tending to the young and to the queen. Soldiers, as the name implies, they are in charge of defending the colony. And reproductives, as the name implies, these are a lot of the swarmers that we may see here in Louisiana, getting close to swarm season. But they are the ones that will take flight and pair up and begin to mate to start new colonies. The reproductives are also the kings and the queens in the already established colonies. So when we think of the global distribution of termites, we have this great graphic here that kind of shows the diversity of different termite families throughout the world. So for each region on this map, we have blue sections of these pie charts. They represent the percentage of calotermitidity or drywood termites within each of these regions. We have the orange section of these pie charts. Those are the rhinotermitidity. Those are the subterranean termites. And the gray pie pieces, those are the higher termites, the termitidity. So that really kind of shows you a relative but the relative diversity throughout the world. And if we scale this to show abundance of each of these termite families, you can see that there are, even though we have plenty of termite problems here in the United States, you know, there is a much greater abundance in other parts of the world as well, as you can see from here. So we're going to kind of go through each one of these regions and talk about the diversity of termite species that can be found around the world before we circle back and hit on the termites of Louisiana. So let's start with African termites. So within the continent of Africa, we have subterranean termites, drywood termites, harvester termites, and higher termites. Okay, so subterranean termites, as the name implies, they nest underground. They can also nest within living and dead trees and within logs. Now, they are soft-bodied insects, which are very prone to drying out. So they do build mud tubes when they are foraging above the soil surface. And these mud tubes, as you can see here on the right of the screen, not only do they provide protection against drying out, but they will also provide protection against predators such as ants. Subterranean termites will build carton nests, as you can see here in this middle. That carton nest is a nest that is constructed out of soil, saliva, their excrement, and wood. So this is a very well known pest of economic importance. Okay, so drywood termites typically have smaller colonies than subterranean termites, mainly because they are limited to their foraging areas. So they're not going to be foraging under the soil surface like subterranean termites. They are going to be living within the wood that they are feeding on. So they will live on and feed on sound, dead, and dry wood. They don't have nests, but they do excavate galleries within the wood. And within that wood, they will pack their fecal pellets. And many times people don't know that they are even present until they start kicking out these six-sided fecal pellets outside of their gallery system. So they have a very distinct indicator of their presence. So harvester termites are pretty cool. So they nest underground. They will come above the soil surface, gather food, and take it back under the soil surface for later use. So they mainly feed on grasses, and they're pretty temperature sensitive. So they will forage at night in the summer and by day in the winter during the cooler temperatures. And evidence above ground can be seen when the workers will dump small piles of soil and debris from their underground nest. So here we have a video of some harvester termites at work. You can see them, they're kind of foraging above the soil surface. They are grabbing some grasses to take back down below, which they will feed on later on. So the higher termites of Africa, it's a very diverse group of termites with a wide range of nesting and feeding habits. So these can include mound building termites that build very round mounds. They can also be mound builders that will grow fungus inside of their mounds, as you can see in the picture here on the right. Okay, it also includes group of arboreal nest builders, which will have their nests up in the trees, as well as soil feeders, soldierless colonies as well. So if we take a closer look at some of these fungus growing termites, these mound builders, we're talking the family Microtermitidae. They will construct these large, elaborate nests that contain all these gallery systems, pretty ornate gallery systems with chimneys that can help regulate the temperature and humidity within their nest. And they also have a cavity that is filled with a fungus comb. So down here at the bottom, you can see where their fungal comb would be. So what they will do is they are actually cultivating this fungus within their nest, and they have a symbiotic relationship between themselves and this cultivated fungus to help them with food digestion. There is also a queen cell located at the base of this mound within the main nest, and that is where she is housed. She's kind of sealed off in a very protective chamber, and the workers will tend to her, and the soldiers will help defend her. So inside of a macrotermes mound, it can be pretty fascinating if you're ever lucky enough to try to dissect one of these things. So here we can see remnants of a fungal comb inside of a mound. It looks a lot like maybe some coral from the ocean, or with all those little intricate folds in there. And one way that researchers have learned to study the gallery systems within these mounds is by taking a section of that mound and actually pouring molten zinc into it to create a zinc cast of a termite mound. Within Australia, you have also a lot of diversity within termite species. So within Australia, you have about 300 species within groups of subterranean termites, drywood termites, higher termites, and then we also have the master Termitidae, which is quite a fascinating termite as well. So subterranean termites, just like the ones that we saw in Africa, they will build mounds with extensive gallery systems, but other species of subterranean termites are exclusively under the soil surface. So the Coptotermi species in Australia look very similar to other Coptotermi species. However, they are building these above ground mounds. And I was lucky enough one time to visit Australia and see some of these termite mounds. Here you can see a picture of me proudly sitting in front of one that I just had to get my hands on and break it apart a little bit. One thing that really surprised me about these mounds is they are very difficult to break into. It's a very hard, tough outer surface. A lot like concrete, but if you can manage to get your way through that, you kind of get to a soft, I guess, much softer, more pliable center where these termites are living. So drywood termites, again, in Australia, much smaller colonies, not constructing nests. They excavate galleries within woods. And in Australia, we are dealing with mainly Invasive minor and Cryptotermes brevis, as you can see here. And again, their presence is detected by those very distinct six-sided fecal pellets. Higher termites in Australia, it is a very diverse group. It can include arboreal species that live above ground within the tops of trees. But you also have mound building termites as well. And these mounds are quite different than the ones that we saw in Africa, or the kind of round mounds that we can see in some of the subterranean termites. So here we can see these compass termites up here in the top right. So these mounds are always oriented north-south, which takes advantage of the sun's warmth in the morning. But it gets very hot in Australia, so termites are actually able to avoid direct sunlight during noontime. We also have these cathedral termites, and you can see in this picture here the size of the person in comparison to how huge that cathedral mound is. So they can be quite massive. And then we have Mastotermitidae. So this is a sole living species in Australia, Mastotermes darwinensis. It's a very primitive termite. They're only found in northern Australia, and the species will nest below the soil surface. So at this point, I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Janowicki to talk about Asian termites.
Okay, thank you. So we'll kind of shift as we continue on our tour of the world of termites. So for the Asian termites, as we saw on the map that we was shown earlier, there's the most diversity of species in Asia. So there's many species. Almost a third of all known species of termites are held within Asia. However, this number might be slightly artificial, as many of these species are found to be synonymous. So a synonymous species is essentially when two people name the same thing, two different names. So there's two names given to the same species. So taxonomists are hard at work and have a lot of headway to get through to make sure that all of these species are unique. But nonetheless, there's some very interesting species there. Another fungus growing termite, Odontotermes, is found there. So similar to what Dr. Catone showed with the termites in Africa. These are collecting material and returning them to the nest. The young workers are in there chewing the material and doing their task along the way to help make this fungal comb. And then eventually the fungal comb can be harvested and consumed by the colony. Next, I'll head over to the Neotropical termites. So this contains about 20% of the total termite species. Here's a few examples. I'll go through each of these. So I was lucky enough to spend some time in Costa Rica surveying termites. So many of these were very abundant. So this is an example of the arboreal nest in the Subterranean Termite. As we saw in other species have arboreal nests, but this nest is a little bit bigger than a football, maybe the size of about 2 footballs, and is held up in a tree. So these are very distinct, very obvious to find. And then the soldiers of this species, rather than having mandibles, have these nozzle-shaped heads, as you can see in this video. I can make it run again or move on. But so they have nozzle-shaped heads that are able to spray a chemical defense against an opponent, rather than having a large jaw to attack. There's also a crazy example. There's the asymmetrical snapping soldiers. So in this soldier, as you can see on the picture, has these very long, slender mandibles. And so what it does is it presses these mandibles together very hard, and eventually they snap. And just like when you snap your fingers, you can make a very fast motion. These are some of the fastest reported motions. So I have a video on the right. So I threw some Nasutotermes soldiers in to go and mess with this soldier, and you can see him get ready and then snap. And so that snap motion, if it targeted against the individual, can break through the cuticle of these other individuals. But some of these are found to be the fastest motion by an animal in the world. There's also the ones that I like to call the unicorn termites. These are an example of some termite soldiers have mandibles, some of them have nozzles. These ones have both. So they have both a very long nozzle that's able to spray a chemical defense, but also these very large mandibles, as you can see kind of at the base here below. And so from this overhead shot of them, you can see these mandibles are really sticking out, so they could go around and grab onto a predator. And so when I was in Costa Rica, I kept hearing people say that they saw these termites above ground, and they would tell me where they were and send me out into the jungle to try to find them. And I never had luck. For the first time I was there, I never found them alive. Somebody brought back a dish of them, but I was constantly, running out to wherever they said they just saw them. But these ones are actually foraging above ground as well, like the harvester termites. They're kind of a moving, flowing nest, and so they'll be in an area and then kind of move on as they go. But they're very neat, and they run around with that nozzle in the air, sort of looking like a unicorn. Also in Brazil, there's some giant termite mounds that can actually be seen from outer space. So this is another one in this group that has the nozzle and the mandibles. So this is Syntermes dirus. So these giant mounds are visible from satellite images. So these are 7 to 13 feet high. They're not actually a mound that the termites are living in, like the ones that we saw, but instead these are actually just the waste pile from a bunch of underground digging. So as the termites are in there digging, they need somewhere to throw their waste. And so this waste pile is very large. So this is thought to be the most extensive bioengineering by a single insect species, as they've moved over 2 cubic miles of soil in this area. So it's a massive effort. As we come into the United States, this is where we have the least number of species. As you can see on the map with the scale to abundance, there was the circle almost disappeared. There's so few species here in the US compared to other places. But where they are, they are quite a problem. But we have a few different groups. I can go through each one of them here. So we have dampwood termites. So this is a smaller family, the Archotermopsidae. These are generally not considered a pest, and most usually have a more western distribution. Some of these are really neat. If you get out in the west, as they can be very, very large termites, almost as big as like the tip of your pinky. Some of these soldiers can be very, very large. We also have the drywood termites, which we talked about with the fecal pellets being distinct, but these generally have a coastal distribution. So we have a handful of species that are considerable pests here. You can see listed, but these are really only a problem in coastal areas. Sometimes they are shipped inland. If you send something that contains these termites, you can bring them into a different area, but they're not likely to survive too long outside of these kind of high humidity coastal areas. We also have higher termites. So most of these are not considered to be a pest. However, the desert termite, or termites in the genus Nathematermes, these can be a pest in pasture and compete for the grass with cows. Many of these higher termites are found kind of out in desert areas or in South Florida. But you can see the first one there, Termes, looks a lot like the Termes, has that nozzle-shaped head. And can be found out west in the deserts. Nathematermes will feed on the grass and put mud tubes all over, covering all of the grass to feed on them. And then Amatermes is a genus that has, it looks a lot like subterranean termites, but this is a higher termite. Another example, we have an invasive species. So I showed Termes corninger in Costa Rica, but we also have this introduced into the United States. So this is a major pest in the Neotropics, feeds on a wide variety of food sources and has these fast growing colonies. So in the United States, it's been intercepted at ports over 100 times between 1984 and 2011. So it's definitely coming to the United States many, many times. But how many times is it establishing? So sure enough, in 2001 in Dania Beach, Florida, in South Florida, this was discovered. It likely came off of a boat in a marina. So as these boats traveled into the tropical areas, it stayed there long enough, the termites moved in, made a nest in the boat, and then that boat left and came up to the harbor here nearby where they were discovered. They might have swarmed out of that boat and then began to start new colonies there in Florida. And it was thought to be eradicated. However, more recently in 2016, it was found about 13 miles away. And genetic evidence has shown that this is the same introduction. So this isn't a new introduction, as you would expect, since it's so close to the previous one. And they were able to swarm, so they had a chance to start new colonies. So this is a pest that so far is still pretty isolated in South Florida, but might be spreading down the road. So next, we'll look at the subterranean termites in the United States. So we have some major pest species, Termite formosanus, Reticulotermes flavipes, we'll be talking about a lot in the series and today. There's also a western species, Reticulotermes hesperus. There's a handful of other species out there, but this is generally widespread across most of the United States. The pressure will decrease as you go further and further north and kind of drop off as it gets too cold for these, but these are widespread and found throughout the US. One invasive species, the Termite formosanus, the Formosan subterranean termite, is an invasive species that's quite a problem here in the southeastern United States. So this is originally native to Eastern Asia. It's thought to have returned to the United States on ships from World War II that came from Hawaii and China. And sure enough, some molecular work done from my PhD lab, my advisor Ed Vargo and one of my fellow students, Alex Blumenfeld, did a big molecular study to see where this came from. And what they found was that there was this bridgehead effect in Hawaii. So as you can see on this map, there were multiple introductions from mainland China into Hawaii. And so around the 1880s, this was likely happening as trade started to open up between China and Hawaii. So there are multiple introductions, and then from there, an invasive population spread into Louisiana and Texas. At the same time, there was another introduction from the mainland China into Florida. So we have a mixed population in the United States that came from both Hawaii and China. And so what happened is that bridgehead effect. So a bridgehead effect is the introduction of a species from an already invasive population rather than from the native population. So we actually had both. We had a typical invasion, but we also had a bridgehead effect or bridgehead invasion. And so this is not unheard of. This is very common in things like the fire ant, the red imported fire ant that's across a lot of the United States. We've also sent that from the United States where it's not native to other places. But because of this this mixture, it's had a lot of genes have come over. There's less bottleneck effect and less limiting of this species in the United States, and this makes it one of the top 100 worst invasive species here in the United States. There's another member of that same genus of Coptotermes, the Asian subterranean termite, or Coptotermes gestroi. It looks very similar in appearance. This isn't the best photo, but you can see these look about the same. There's slight differences in the concave or convexness of the head there. There's also differences in the fontanelle, or that gland that's able to spray a chemical defense, where there's a different number of hairs. So this is native to Southeast Asia and has invaded many places. What's troubling about this is that it's found in the same place in Florida as the Coptotermes formosanus, as the Formosan subterranean termite. And sure enough, they were found to swarm at the same time, and taken in the lab, they were able to form these hybrid colonies. So if these hybrid colonies are able to persist, this might enable this tropical or Asian subterranean termite to go a lot further north, because it's very limited in its temperature tolerances. But if it hybridizes with the Formosan subterranean termite, this could spread further. And they found initially, at least, the hybrid colonies grew much faster and were very voracious. So this may enable it to spread further north in the United States. However, these hybrids still have yet to be found in the field. So for now, it's kind of just a threat that might come down the road. And while we think a lot about invasive species coming into the United States, we also need to realize that we're also exporting termites out into other places. So our native subterranean termite, Reticulotermes flavipes, is native to the eastern United States, but it's also been invasively found in France, Austria, Germany, and Italy. And ironically, it was first described from a location in Vienna. So it was first found in a greenhouse in Vienna and described as a species, and that's actually our native species here. So the invasive population was the original one discovered by scientists. And molecular analyses have found the source for many of the populations in France to be Louisiana. So this makes sense, as New Orleans was a major trading port. So these ships were coming back and forth between France and Louisiana. And it was, sure enough, it was first found in some of these port cities in France. So this kind of points to its coming across on a lot of these ships. Okay, so next I'll pass it back to Dr. Catone to discuss the local termites here in Louisiana.
Yes, so we will bring it back to Louisiana. So here in Louisiana, we deal with 5 species of subterranean termites and 4 of drywood termites. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time really kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of what makes subterranean termites different from drywood termites. Okay, but first I would like to talk about our different kinds of subterranean termites that we have. So we do have Formosan subterranean termites here, as well as our native subterranean termites in the genus Reticulotermes. So some major differences between these two kinds of termites is that Formosan colonies can become much larger, with many more individual termites within the colonies. So their colonies can get up into the millions of individuals, whereas our native termite species can get up to maybe 600,000. Okay, Formosan subterranean termite colonies also have a much larger worker to soldier ratio. So within a Formosan colony, you may have 10% of those termites as soldiers, where it may be 1% within a Reticulotermes colony. Within a Formosan colony, those soldiers are also much more aggressive than what we see in our native colonies. So when disturbed, the soldiers of a Formosan colony will actually exude a white kind of sticky fluid out of that fontanelle that Mark had showed a picture of, and that is used as a defensive secretion. So it's not corrosive or acidic or anything like that, but it can stop another insect in its tracks. So if there are ants coming into the colony through a broken mud tube or something like that, that is how the soldiers will defend the colony, along with their very sharp, slender mandibles. Their swarming times are different, as well as the time of the year that they swarm are different. Formosan colonies will have, they do have the capability of creating aerial nests, whereas our native colonies do not. So an aerial nest might be something like within an attic that has a leaky roof. If a swarming pair find a place that is damp enough, they have enough moisture, and they have enough food, they can actually stay within an aerial nest without having contact with the soil. So our native subterranean termites, they do look quite similar, but there are some differences that entomologists will look for to determine the species. Much of this has to do with the curvature of the mandibles. So up top here, you can see how for each one of these species, Hageni, Virginicus, and Flavipes, the curvature of the mandibles and how they overlap on the soldier's head is quite different. Within the reproductives of our native subterranean termites, these are the alates. There is slight difference in coloration within the bodies and the wings, and different sizes as well. However, if you look at the heads of a lot of these subterranean termites, of the alates, entomologists can even look at the location of a simple eye, where it is in relation to the complex eye, to be able to determine the species. So some other differences within our subterranean termites are the morphological differences of the soldier caste. Okay, so Formosan subterranean termite soldiers will have this very distinct, this teardrop shaped head right here with very slender mandibles. And our native subterranean termites of Reticulotermes species, their head capsule is going to be more rectangular shaped. Some other distinct characteristics of Formosan subterranean termites has to do with the wings on that alate. So if you were to take the alate's wings and look at them under a microscope, you will see millions of tiny little hairs covering those wings. Here we have a beautiful photograph of the Termite Queen within a Formosan subterranean termite colony. You can see here that her abdomen is completely elongated. It is engorged with eggs. And in fact, she is in the process of laying an egg right now when this photograph was taken. So this is pretty much an ovary with legs. She's being tended to by the workers. She's being fed by the workers. The soldiers are keeping her safe. They are defending her. And so her main goal right now is just to lay eggs. Okay, and as Mark indicated earlier, Formosan subterranean termites were introduced to New Orleans after World War II from Southeast China. They came over on infested material, wood crates and pallets, and it was introduced into a couple different areas of New Orleans when they were introduced. So the Army's port of embarkation, Camp Leroy Johnson, and the Algiers Naval Station. Okay, so they were introduced following World War II, but it wasn't discovered in Louisiana until the late 1960s. So we're talking a good couple decades of just uninterrupted spread of Formosan subterranean termites. Nobody knew to look for them here, so nobody was looking for them. However, in New Orleans, we have the perfect conditions for Formosan termites. We have this nice subtropical climate, so it is warm, it is humid. The termites thrive in this kind of environment. Subterranean termites are very cryptic, so they stay hidden. They are under the soil's surface. They're not out creating these arboreal nests in the tops of trees. So they're all underground. We have wood everywhere in New Orleans. So not just in our construction, but there's wood debris under buildings that's been built on top of that. So there's just a lot of food for them here as well. So we have the right environment, the right temperature, the right humidity, and plenty of food for these termites as well. And that is how we have such a high termite pressure here. So this map indicates throughout the country what the relative termite pressure is, as far as subterranean termite colonies go. So what exactly is termite pressure? You can kind of think of it as a concentration of termite colonies in a given area. So really here in New Orleans, we have high termite pressure, meaning we have a lot of colonies in a relatively small space. And these termites have had such a huge impact on the city of New Orleans. So not only do these termites do a lot of damage to historic structures, but historic trees as well. You know, we have live oaks that have been around for hundreds of years, and termites have just been tearing into them. We've had a history of these massive alate swarms that were so big that they would really impact nighttime activities. You know, there are stories from the past of baseball games having to be postponed because all of the swarming alates were blocking the light from the light fixtures around the ball field. We also have damage from falling trees and weakened structures, so that can also pose a hazard of its own. So back in 2003, somebody did an estimated annual cost of termite treatments and damage and repairs within New Orleans. And it was determined that just within the greater New Orleans area, it was an annual cost of $300 million. Okay, that's in treatments and repairs. Just taking care of the trees, the damage that happened to the trees, that was, you know, $6 million in damage. And nationwide, it is a $1 billion business in termite control. So in 1998, some federal funding was put aside for Operation Full Stop. So this was a federally funded program, went from 1998 to 2012, and it really was a partnership of many different universities and agencies. We had the USDA was involved, we were involved, LSU, University of Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Mississippi, all kinds of pest management professionals from the industry, as well as, you know, we had to get property owners and tenants involved. So this was really in response to termites damaging very historic properties in New Orleans. And the main focus was the French Quarter. So one of the main goals was to have this large area-wide termite control strategy and put it in place within the French Quarter. Okay, it also provided for a lot of research to be done to improve termite control methods and detection technologies. There was a lot of education and technology transferred involved in Operation Full Stop as well. And this really was kind of an integrated pest management for termite control within the French Quarter. So there was use of bait technology that would eliminate colonies within the French Quarter. You can see this map right here of the French Quarter, and every square on here is an in-ground termite bait station. We also monitored for the alates using sticky traps along the light posts, which actually we still do to this day. And there were a lot of buildings that needed full termite inspections. We also treated infested trees with both baits and liquid termiticides. The research that was done involved a lot of colony delineation. So these termites are so cryptic and they're under the soil surface, to be able to tell their foraging territories and one colony from another colony, we would use either a mark release recapture method, where we would actually die individual termites and let them release them, and then find out where they were popping up in adjacent in-ground bait stations to determine foraging territories. But we also had the capacity to run the genetic analysis on termite colonies as well, to be able to tell them apart. What we observed during Operation Full Stop was first of all, the number of alates that we were monitoring for across the French Quarter, those were reduced in number. Termite activity within the bait stations was reduced. So we were eliminating colonies, helping to reduce the termite pressure within that area. Some inspections did show that we still had isolated pockets of infested trees, and we had some aerial colonies, so some above ground infestations. But really, the overall termite pressure within the French Quarter was reduced. So it was really quite a phenomenal program to be a part of, and really did a lot of good for the city. So when we talk about drywood termites and subterranean termites, I kind of want to make it a bit clearer what some of those fundamental differences are between the drywood colonies here in Louisiana as well as the subterranean colonies. So they belong to two different families. So drywood termites are within the family Termitidae, and subterranean termites are within the family Rhinotermitidae. Okay, as the name suggests, remember subterranean termites will nest underground in the soil, within trees. They will need a constant moisture source. And so because they are subterranean, their foraging territories can spread out quite a bit, so they can actually house much larger colonies. Drywood termites will live entirely within the wood that they're feeding on. They do not require any soil contact. They get all the moisture that they need from the wood, the humidity in the air, and from their own metabolism. But because they are limited to space, basically they will have much smaller colonies. So they may have a colony that's might be a couple thousand strong. Look very different from subterranean termites as well. So we've seen subterranean termite soldiers with those very long, slender mandibles. Well, the mandibles of drywood termites have these ridges on the inner part of the mandible here. These are called marginal teeth. So they will have these mandibles with teeth. The pronotum is also different within these drywood termites and subterranean termites. So the pronotum is what would be analogous to, say, your neck area. So it's this area right behind your head. And on drywood termites, the pronotum will be as wide as the head, whereas on subterranean termites, that pronotum is going to be narrower than the width of the head. However, there are some drywood termites out there where the soldiers do not have these huge, massive mandibles. Some soldiers, like this Cryptotermes brevis that we can see right here, have very small mandibles. Well, you may be wondering, how on earth is that soldier going to defend its colony? Well, it has this very hard, highly sclerotized head capsule that can be used as physical defense within their gallery system. So if ants or any other predator is trying to invade within their gallery system, their head can actually block their entrance. Drywood alates, they do vary in color and shape and body size, and even their wing color. Here are drywood alates from representing the 4 species that we deal with here in Louisiana. And it's very important to tell the difference when you're looking at alates. So some drywood alates look very similar to Formosan subterranean termite alates. However, the main differences that you would look for when identifying these are the pronotum and the wings. So again, the pronotum, this neck area on the drywood termite is going to be as wide as the width of the head. And you're not going to see that on a subterranean termite. It's going to be narrower than the width of the head. The wings, like I showed you before, of the Formosan subterranean alate will be covered in these little microscopic hairs. You will not see that on drywood termites. Also, drywood termites have what is called cross veins, and I believe I have a diagram in my next slide here. So these cross veins, if you look at the top of the alate wing, if you saw this under a microscope, right, you would have all of these millions of tiny hairs on a Formosan subterranean termite wing. Our native subterranean termites, they're not going to have those hairs on the wings. And drywood termites, the very distinct characteristic of their wings are these little cross veins here. So those are veins that connect the top two veins of a drywood alate. They look kind of like vertical hash marks. So for more information on identification of termites of Louisiana, we do have a downloadable PDF. It's a pictorial guide at nola.gov/mosquitoes/documents termite ID guide. So I wanted to touch a little bit on the life cycles of subterranean termites as well as drywood termites. It can be a pretty complicated process. Okay, but we're going to start with the alates. So here, these are all pictures of Formosan subterranean termites. And their alates, they swarm at nighttime. They are very much attracted to bright lights. So will find them swarming in May and June at nighttime along the street lights and porch lights, things like that. So you can have thousands of them flying around together. Males and females will pair up. They will drop to the ground and shed their wings. They don't need them under the soil surface. And they will find a new place to start a brand new colony. Okay, so once they mate and the queen produces eggs, here we have eggs right here. Those eggs are going to hatch in these little tiny larvae. So these are termite larvae when they're newly hatched. And once they hatch, they go through a series of molts. They will molt throughout their lifetime, but they will be molting into either workers, soldiers, or reproductive forms. So again, they will molt into either workers, which are responsible for foraging for food, as well as feeding on it and sharing food throughout the colony. The soldiers, of course, responsible for defense of the colony, and then the reproductives. Okay, so for creating new colonies or for growing the colony. So if they molt into what is known as a nymph, this nymph will go through another subsequent molt and be an alate for the next round of swarming. However, one really interesting thing about the termite life cycle is, let's say that something happens to either the king or the queen, or she's kind of getting up there in age and she's not producing as many eggs as she probably should to sustain the colony. They can actually form supplemental reproductives. So you can have termite larvae that will be molting into supplemental reproductives. This means that you can have multiple kings and queens within a single colony. Okay, that is the natural progression of a subterranean termite life cycle. A drywood termite life cycle is just slightly different. Okay, so we have alates that will swarm and mate and pair up. Here we can see a picture of a reproductive right here. So once they start laying eggs within their home, which is going to be what they're going to be feeding on, right? Their eggs will hatch, and instead of either becoming a worker, a soldier, or an alate, you're going to have the larvae molt into what's called a suitor gate, which is not a terminal worker caste. So these suitor gates can then molt into either soldiers or alates. And those alates, of course, can restart the cycle once they swarm to create a new colony. Okay, so I'm going to let Dr. Janowicki talk a little bit more about behavior.
Okay. So we've been talking about termites being social insects, so I just wanted to take a second and kind of define what we mean by that. So we've talked about a lot of these characteristics, so this should be not too much of a surprise. So being eusocial is a special characteristic in biology, and this trait is common in many bees, wasps, and is found in all ants and all termites. And so this is defined by having three different characteristics. So they have cooperative brood care. So other individuals are helping take care of each other's offspring. So brood is just the eggs and larvae of social insects, especially when gathered in a special chamber. So this example shows a lot of ants with all of their larvae and pupa that are there. ready to grow up. To be eusocial, you also have that reproductive division of labor. So this is when only some individuals are reproducing in the colony. So the king and the queen and maybe the secondary reproductives that were in the life cycle there are going to be doing the reproducing, but most of the individuals are not going to be reproducing. So not everyone is able to or is actually reproducing in a colony. This queen is very physogastric, as Carrie described, having this greatly enlarged abdomen to accommodate those ovaries and eggs, where she is an ovary with legs. Just a great description. They also have these overlapping generations, so their individuals are surviving longer and maintaining the colony and staying on for time. Many insects will hatch in the spring as the weather warms up, grow all year. At the end of the season, they'll lay eggs and die, and they'll never see their offspring. So in eusocial colonies, they're sticking around a lot longer and overlapping further. So having these three characteristics are what it takes for this eusocial term. There's other different levels of socialness in an insect, whether they just aggregate or whatnot. But what we're talking about with these termites and ants and some bees and some wasps and some other things, this is eusociality. And termites, they're kind of special from other eusocial insects because they consume cellulose, and they're actually unique from many things. It's a pretty rare trait to consume cellulose, so that's makes them special and makes them quite a pest of houses. But they do this with some help from their gut symbionts. So they have all these different things inside their gut. I have a video here of one wiggling around. I think it looks a little bit like a mouse kind of crawling to the right, but this is some of their symbionts in there that are wiggling around. So for that, I just took the gut out of a termite, smashed it on a microscope slide, and just zoomed in really close to see all these things wiggling around. So this is how they're able to do that. So they're not able to do that on their own. And this is partially why they think that they have evolved sociality. So they've evolved from this cockroach-like ancestor, and they have the cockroaches usually have that aggregation behavior. When you find cockroaches in an area, a lot of times they'll be aggregated together. They're not social insects in that stage, but they are being social. And so what happens whenever a termite molts, they'll shed all of their exoskeleton to grow larger and larger. And when they do this, they're also shedding a part of the lining of their gut. So they lose that gut symbiont. So as they molt and grow, they have to recover that gut symbiont from siblings. So if you're living with siblings and you need siblings to be there, otherwise you can't consume your food. This is part of the reasoning for why termites have this highly advanced social life cycle. And they do this, so I say that they're able to get their gut symbionts from each other. So they do this through trophallaxis. So trophallaxis is the exchange of regurgitated liquids between colony members. This can be mouth to mouth, stomodial, or anus to mouth, proctodial. And this is important to recover their symbionts, but it's also important because some castes cannot feed themselves. So the larvae, or those first individuals that hatch out of the egg, their mandibles are not sclerotized. So sclerotized is just a way of saying that the cuticle is hardened and is stiff through a biological process as it ages. Also, the soldiers usually have those so modified of mandibles that they're not able to eat the wood on their own. They require to be fed by other individuals. So trophallaxis is the way that they're able to share this food back and forth in the colony. So we talked about soldiers and having their morphological adaptations. So some of them have those very large mandibles, as you can see in the top right, where they have these large muscular mandibles. Some of them have the nozzle-like heads, like the Termites that we've shown, and then some of that have that phragmatic or plugged-like head. This is that cryptic defense where they block a nest entrance. So they're mainly defending against ants. So ants are the main opponent of termites and one of their major predators that are eating a lot of these termites. And so where we worry about termites is when they're foraging on our house. So termites are able to eat wood very slowly as they rip off these pieces of wood. So you can see them shearing off these little pieces, but it's a very, very slow process that takes a whole colony here to really do some damage to the wood. So an individual termite can pull out a grain of the wood, but when you have thousands and thousands in line ready to come and take a piece, this wood will eventually be destroyed. So termites, as we mentioned, feed on any cellulose material. This can be wood or paper. In this picture here, you can see they've started feeding on these books. So that's still cellulose they're able to feed in. So they came up, built all of these mud tubes around it to be able to have some shelter, and are moving in and feeding on the paper of the books. So cellulose is that indigestible carbohydrate that makes up plant cell walls and vegetable fibers. So again, that's very, very rare for termites to be able to feed on that, as not many things are out there feeding on cellulose. With the subterranean termites, the major one that are most of the pest problems here in Louisiana and across the US are these subterranean termites, and they're considerably problematic because of some of their foraging aspects. So subterranean termites can nest and feed in multiple resources. So the termites that are located outside in a tree in the front yard could be the same ones that are foraging into the house, but there's also going to be multiple colonies around with this high pressure of termites. These foraging areas are distantly connected through underground tunnels that link these different areas together. So they're going to have the nest in one area, foraging in another, and they're constantly looking for more food sources and foraging in an area. The termites are doing this tunneling. They tunnel over time to acquire resources. Termites are, for as voracious as they are at knocking down houses, they're very weak, they're very soft-bodied, and they require high humidity. So if you take a termite and just leave it on a dish, you put it in a container on the counter, it'll quickly dry out, within a couple days be dead. So without their nice humid conditions, they're pretty much useless. So they dig these tunnels to have that protection from drying out, but also physical protection from ants and other things. So you can see they're tunneling there in a plate. As they tunnel, the individuals are actually carrying these pieces of material back and forth. So again, it's that whole colony effort where they're picking up pieces and moving them to and fro. This is an example of some of these mud tubes. So they'll use these mud tubes to protect themselves. So you can see as we break this open with the pen, the termites are moving back and forth across this tunnel, probably carrying resources back or moving back and forth. This is a Formosan subterranean termite, so you can see the soldiers kind of peeking out up there. The soldiers are much more aggressive and will respond to a nest invasion. So they're still kind of timidly staying in the nest or the tunnel entrances, but they're responding. Whereas if this was our native subterranean termites, they wouldn't be there. As we speed it up, you can see that they're reconstructing this. So this is a time lapse now of them working. You can see there's lots of soldiers on the periphery protecting these workers that are bringing in more of these grains of sand. This is in a lab setup with a lot of sand for them. And over time, they'll completely reconstruct this tunnel. So they need that protected area, and they're going to re-establish this. So if you find tunnel or mud tubes on a house and you knock them off one day and come back, even if you didn't see termites, if they're back the next day, that's probably still an active colony that came back and fixed those tubes. So in the end, you can see this is completely reconstructed. The termites are again hidden and will remain out of sight. So for most of the time, termites don't want to be seen, don't want to be outside in the dry environment. So they'll create these areas so they can move undercover without being noticed. So then I'll pass it back to Carrie to wrap things up.
Oh yeah, so just to wrap things up, termites are of huge economic importance here, subterranean termites especially. We've kind of gone over these figures already of the estimated annual cost of termite infestations, treatments, damage, and repairs. But it is so important, and why we do this pest seminar series in the first place. It is so important to kind of know thy enemy in order to protect your home. So within our seminar series on termites, which I do hope that all of you will join us for parts 2, 3, and 4, we are going to be covering pretty well in depth, mostly subterranean termites of the United States, with focus on not just Formosan subterranean termites, but our native subterranean termites as well, because they are so economically important to our region, especially here along the Gulf Coast. So in part 2, we are going to be discussing how an inspection is performed and what to expect if you have a home being inspected for termites. In part 3, we are going to be discussing how termites are treated in your home. So we will be covering different treatment methods. And in part 4, we are going to be talking about trees and how we protect them against attack from Formosan subterranean termites. So I do hope that everybody is planning on joining us for subsequent parts of this seminar series. I want to thank everybody for attending today, and I will open it up for questions at this point.
I'm checking the chat. I don't see any questions yet, Dr. Catone. We'll
Okay.
give people a minute if they're typing, just to be sure.
Sure. Yes.
Any questions? Otherwise, we have a quiet group.
Okay, I don't see any questions.
Okay, well, just a reminder for folks, if you do come up with a question later on, Stacy, do you want to give the email address again?
Yes, you can email us at education@nola.gov. And I also placed the link for the termite guide that Dr. Catone talked about in the chat if you need it.
Thank you so much for doing that. Yes, it's a really great pictorial guide of our termite species of Louisiana.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for coming and joining us for part 1 of the series. As stated earlier, part 2 will be Thursday, April 21st from 12 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. And everyone can have a great day. Enjoy your afternoon.
Okay, thank you.